advisor to the Minister of Energy in Sierra Leone, as well as the country head for our project there. My colleague Garrett is advisor to the Minister of Energy in Rwanda. And the topic that we wanted to address today, we've seen a lot of big countries like Tanzania, South Africa. Now we're going to talk about two small countries, fragile countries, which came out of a civil conflict, which devastated the infrastructure. Those countries are very poor. Per capita GDP is below $500. And the question that we have is, if you look at the value chain, so distribution, so generation, transmission, and distribution, you have gaps everywhere. So you have very low capacity. You have an inefficient distribution network. So the real question that we wanted to pose is, finally, what are the gaps that we should fill first? So before I go into that, let me just introduce a little bit this organization, AGI, the Tony Blair Africa Governance Initiative. It was set up by the former Prime Minister, Tony Blair, about 5 years ago. Tony Blair believed that Africa will be what India and China was for the 20th century. He is a strong believer that Africa is the next emerging continent, and that if governments of Africa are strengthened, then they can realize that ambition. The AGI is currently operating in 7 countries. We started in Rwanda and Sierra Leone in 2008. Now we have teams in Liberia, Nigeria, Guinea, South Sudan, Malawi, and we are expecting to have 2 or 3 more projects next year. And basically, what we do is, it's not rocket science. Is as quoted by the president of Liberia, Johnson Sirleaf, is what is difficult is not to get the right idea. What is difficult is actually to implement it. So the role of AGI is basically to work with government to implement the vision, the strategies. And if we have to summarize it into basically 3 deliverables, what we do, the first one will be we help the ministers to come up with a robust operational plan that basically crystallize their vision, their ideas. 2, we set up system within the government to ensure that this plan is implemented. And because you got a lot of plans which sit on the shelves, which is nice, but at the end of the day, a plan is good only if it's implemented. And 3, we build the capacity of the minister's team so that this plan can actually be carried forward. So that's basically the 3 things that we do in every country where we operate, in every sector where we operate. In energy, we started to have a project in Guinea. In 2012, we got 3 projects in Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Rwanda. This year, we probably have a 4th country, which is still to be confirmed. And we are planning to grow to 5-6 countries in 2014. What I like to say here, there is a growing, I would say, interest from our counterparts. For example, in Sierra Leone, power was a priority for the last 5 years. Now it is number 1 priority of the president. It's not number 2, number 3. And we see the same phenomenon. Without power, there is no private sector development possible. You can't power your hospital. You can't power your schools, etc., etc. So there is a growing interest, a growing appetite from our presidents who we work with to solve that problem, which is for fragile countries like Sierra Leone, Rwanda, Guinea, or Liberia, very, very difficult. The other thing that I'd like to say here is AGI growing that expertise in power. We've been, in the business for about 2 years, so we're still learning. So we are welcoming a lot interactions with you guys who have much deeper expertise. So let's come back to the question of which gaps to fill first. So Rwanda, it's an 11 million population. You probably know where it is. It's in East Africa. A per capita GDP of $500. Sierra Leone is a small country. Yesterday I was asked where was Sierra Leone. Was it in Latin America or in the Pacific? So I decided that I probably had to say that Sierra Leone is in West Africa, next to Ghana, not far away from Senegal, between the 2 countries. It's a very poor country, probably bottom 3, bottom 4 in Africa. So I will let my colleague speak about Rwanda, and then I'll come back to Sierra Leone.
Cheers. Okay, so for Rwanda, I think the easiest way to kind of describe the work that we're doing is to sort of say where we were this time last year and kind of what we've done over the past 12 months and then what Rwanda really needs to do moving forward. So I joined the Rwanda team back in sort of March last year. At that time, there was a newly appointed minister, but the capacity of the ministry was pretty limited. Not in terms of the people they had. The people they had were pretty good, but there were only literally 3 people in the ministry who were dealing with energy, and they had an enormous remit, and it was regarded as being one of the president's big priorities. So where we were kind of last year, and the general situation of Rwanda, around 110 megawatts of installed capacity, of which around 70 megawatts is hydro, 40 megawatts is thermal. A very, very high reliance on expensive diesel, burning imported diesel, sort of 42 cents a kilowatt hour, which means that currently the tariff is heavily subsidized. So around 40% of the tariff is subsidies. Last year there was no consensus of what their demand was going to be over the coming 5 to 10 years. And they didn't really have a clear roadmap for how they were going to meet this demand, that they didn't know what it would be. And finally, they had quite limited ability to actually manage their projects and monitor their projects. So the minister would often be quite exasperated that she would have no idea what's going on particular projects. Lots of issues would remain unresolved. The general kind of project management discipline. On distribution, they've had and they still have a very strong electrification program. So they're currently at 17% electrification, and they've got a lot of good sort of concessional finance, and they've got a very well-functioning program there. There is a concern, and this has been a concern for a while, around the financial sustainability of these grid connections. So each of these connections costs on average around $500, $600. If you think that 80% of the Rwandan population lives on less than $2 a day, not many of them are going to be able to pay the level of electricity tariff that would sustain those costs. I guess in terms of the government and regulatory environment, they didn't have a clear view as what their demand would be, but they had very ambitious targets as to what their generation should be. So they had a 1,000 megawatt target by 2017, and they also have a target of 70% electrification by 2017. Partially, in fact, primarily as a result of having such an ambitious target and not a very clear view on what their demand was. They didn't have a clear strategy as to what generation they wanted to deliver and how they were going to attract investment. And they were very reliant, and they, to an extent still are, on unsolicited bids. And the final thing in that area really is there was quite an unclear institutional setup. So this is particularly around investment. There's a lack of clarity as to exactly who you speak to on investments, and there are kind of multiple decision makers. So do you speak to the president? Do you speak to the prime minister? Do you speak to the development board? So that's kind of where we were. I think in terms of proposed solutions, the real focus that I worked on with the minister was to help her develop an understanding of what the demand forecast would be. So lots of consultancies have come in. We've had the likes of Fitchner come in, and AFDB have done a study, and we've had lots and lots of different studies to project the demand, all of which put it around sort of 300 to 600 megawatts. But the real difficulty is that's never gained any political traction. So I think the message here is, you can do as good a kind of consulting study as you want, but unless you've got someone there to actually build the capacity of the ministers and of the decision makers, then the odds on those sort of inputs actually taking place are quite low. The other thing that we've established is just, and this might sound quite tedious, but in terms of actually getting stuff done, it's quite useful. So just to establish a sort of project management discipline, so the ability to actually escalate risks, escalate issues, and get things delivered. What we still need to do, I think, is we really need to firm up their energy planning unit. So we've got a significant generation investment, and the focus is there at the moment. But in terms of how that's going to align with the utility and the kind of long-term financial sustainability of the utility, and on the distribution side, we really still do need to look at other options than just connecting 70% of the country to the grid, because the financial sustainability of that doesn't seem to make sense. So it's part of the reason we're here, to try and understand what options there are around that. Moving forward. Just to be clear on kind of the the level and where support has been provided in Rwanda. So the basic model is that it's long-term support. So it's people actually being in the country for 2 years plus, to work with these decision makers. So AGI themselves support at the political level. So we have people in the centre of government. So that's the Ministry of Finance, the Presidency, the Prime Minister's office, which is absolutely essential to actually drive decisions and make sure decisions get made. Because no matter how good a proposal is, if it doesn't get accepted, there's no point. And secondly, to just support with coordination. So a lot of the projects that they're looking to deliver require quite significant coordination across different aspects of government. At the minister level, basically as I've described, but also supporting kind of quite simple stuff. So just structures to allow decisions to be made. So what's the process for getting decisions made, and basic systems for understanding how we're performing. The difference in Rwanda to other AGI projects is we have this concept of a strategic capacity building initiative, which is a World Bank funded initiative whereby we have technical experts, international experts, a lot of South Africans actually, who are working in kind of more technical roles, typically within the utility. So we have an energy planning expert, we have experts in the various types of generation that they're looking to develop, so geothermal, peat, methane, etc. And those experts are paired up with local counterparts, and the model is very similar to the AGI model in that those people will be there for sort of 2 to 3 years, and their remit is to deliver, but their remit is also to develop these local counterparts. Seb?
So let me carry on with Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone is not as advanced as Rwanda. We only have 90 megawatt on the grid, while we have 270 megawatts of private generation. 60% of the 90 megawatt is hydro. The problem with hydro, we have roughly 2,000 megawatts of hydro potential in the country, but it's very seasonal. It's probably the case for most of the West African countries. So basically, if you get 100 megawatts of power during the rainy season, which is about 3 to 4 months, you get only 10. So it's a ratio to some sites it's 10, to some other sites it's a ratio 1 to 5. There is no transmission network at all. There's just a line between the major hydro dam and the capital city Freetown. We have a 10% electrification, only 70,000 customers for the utility. We run 40% network losses, and we have a lot of load shedding. So basically, we enjoy power only for a few hours every day. There is no regulator today, although there is an act that was passed in 2011, which will probably this year we'll see a regulator coming up. The sector is still vertically integrated, so the utility is throughout the value chain. Although there's again an act that will call for unbundling. So these are like the gaps. I mean, basically, it's if you're a minister, you say, "My God, what should I solve first? Should I increase the capacity? Should I solve my 40% network losses? Should I unbundle the sector right now?" So, myself, minister, we are like 2 or 3 people in the ministry who have a bit of understanding of the power sector, and that's probably it. Then you have the utility. So the type of solution that the ministry is looking at on the generation side is although we have a small population of 6 million people, we have large mining companies who are going to drive the demand. By 2020, we're expecting a demand of roughly 500 to 700 megawatt from 3 major mining companies, and we can't really supply that demand through hydro. We have a huge hydro potential, but it's very seasonal. So we're looking today at a firm power, which will come either from gas, LNG, or coal. We don't have gas, we don't have coal in Sierra Leone, so it will have to be imported. The second thing is the ministry wants to develop a number of hydro projects. One of them is a succession, I will say, an upgrade of the current Bambuna project. So there will be Bambuna 2, which is roughly 250 megawatt. And we are looking at 2 other potential hydro in the west part of the country. The country is also looking at HFO, 100 megawatt, and as well as solar. Transmission, We have the West African Power Pool project, which is under construction, or I would say under design, which is supposed to be completed by 2017. The minister has the ambition to build a national grid. On the distribution side, you've seen that with the 40% network losses, it's very hard to run the utility efficiently. So there's a strong need to turn it around. There's also pressure from everywhere to have a rural electrification program and to electrify other cities. On the top of that, you have to unbundle the sector and set up a regulator. So that's basically 11 things which are very difficult to implement. And you have a ministry which has, as I said, a few people plus the utility to do all that. So it's very ambitious, but is it feasible? That's a really big question. So we try to work with the minister to basically prioritize those things. A few, I would say, arbitrage, for example, would be: shall we unbundle the utility now? Shall we cut the utility into a distribution authority and a generation transmission company? Or we should just focus on improving the performance of the utility? So this kind of arbitrage that we have to make, because the ministry can't do everything. The budget of the ministry is basically $20 million a year. The GDP of the country is $2 billion. So that means that you can't really borrow that much. And your power project is in competition with an airport project, or with a road project, or with a port project. So even if the Chinese or the Indians are coming with concessional loans, you still have this on your book. So you have basically limited financial capacity as well as human capacity. So what we have been doing with the government of Sierra Leone is we both work, I would say, on the high level with the minister and the president team to ensure that the presidency is well aware of the economics of power. To give you an example, about 2 years ago, we were talking about a 1,000 megawatt of HFO plant, which doesn't make any sense, but it was coming from the top. So there is a bit of education to be done at the presidency to ensure that, I would say, political interest is aligned with, I would say, the real strategy. With the minister, we basically work with him. I work with him to crystallize his ambition, his ideas into something which is operational and not just a wish list. On a more technical or operational level, we helped to set up a PPP unit at the presidency, which is still under construction, which is today critical for most of the project that we're going to see in generation side will be IPPs or PPPs. And finally, we work with the 2 or 3 advisors the minister has to implement system and to build their capacity to ensure that this operational plan is actually implemented. In conclusion, it's if we go back to that question, is in those 2 countries, which are the gaps that we should fill first? And I'll come back to what the president of Liberia has said. Is today we really feel that it's not about having the best idea or the best project. It's really about having the right people in the ministry to implement those projects. So I'll probably pause here and welcome questions.
Thank you very much.